The Snow White was fucked twice as soon as she put on her costume. This is a photograph found in the Epstein files. I actually talked about this photograph over a month ago before the newest release of the Epstein files on my YouTube channel, because for a series on there I was going through every single file released by the DOJ, and this is one of the pictures that I came across that I hadn't seen people talking about. And then recently, with the newest release of files, this email was uncovered, which obviously makes the picture of what I can assume is a victim wearing a Snow White costume so much darker. There is also this email uncovered from Jeffrey Epstein to an unknown person. This person said to Epstein, "Got feedback from auditions, students want to film me, still in Hamptons, miss you." And then Epstein responds, "Brett Ratner is going to film a big movie, Snow White. I would love to take photos of you in a Snow White costume. You can get it from the costume store." So are they referring to this girl, who I'm assuming is probably a victim? I believe this picture was taken in Epstein's mansion after all. Well, it gets even worse. So Maria Farmer is a victim of Jeffrey Epstein's. She actually tried to report Epstein in the 1990s, and it generated a CP report. And she paints. She paints based on her experiences and what she knows about Epstein and his inner circle. And as you can see, in this painting, there is a girl in a Snow White costume. But who is this guy shushing the camera supposed to be, who we can assume is the rapist? Well, allegedly, this represents Jess Staley, who is an absolutely very powerful, very wealthy individual who has been an executive with JP Morgan and Barclays and other companies in the past. You can see in 2023, a lawsuit was filed against Jess Staley, which claimed that he talked about Disney princesses with Epstein. And as of late, Jess Staley has been implicated in even more potential crimes. As this headline states, newly unsealed files claim the banker, Jess Staley, who has denied any wrongdoing, forced a woman to touch his genitals during a massage before raping her. So you can even see on the dollar bills in that painting, JP Morgan Chase, definitely about Jess Staley. So let's connect the dots here. We've got Snow White in bed, Jess Staley in his underwear. We've got an email talking about how someone raped someone after they put on a Snow White costume. Then we've got a news article talking about a lawsuit where Jess Staley is emailing about Disney princesses with Jeffrey Epstein, and then the picture of the Snow White also in the files. To me, this seems like a pretty open and shut case, but I want to remind you, Jess Staley has never faced any prosecution. He's never been arrested. He's never been charged. He's never had to answer for any of these alleged crimes. And to this day, he remains a free man. Oh God, this rabbit hole goes deep. So I found this photo in the Epstein files, and in the center of the image, you can see Brock Pierce. Here's the EFTA number for those of you who are curious. And yes, Brock is wearing what looks to be an ancient esoteric symbol on his shirt, but I'm not trying to muddy the waters here. I just had to point it out because it's interesting. Now, who is Brock? Well, he's a former child actor, and he's a pretty prominent name in the cryptocurrency space. Brock Pierce was a child actor when he was younger, and he appeared in a number of films you might recognize him from, including The Mighty Ducks and Little Big League. But here's where things get sticky. When he was younger, Brock got involved with a man who wanted to launch a company. That man's name is Mark Collins Rector. Together, Brock joined in with Mark Collins Rector and a guy named Chad Shackley, and they launched a company called Digital Entertainment Network in the late 90s, early 2000s. So Mark Collins Rector, this Chad guy, and Brock Pierce operated the company Digital Entertainment Network out of a massive mansion in Los Angeles. And according to police reports and newspaper reports at the time, parties would be thrown at this Los Angeles mansion that were attended by the, quote, Hollywood gay A-list. And at those parties, Mark Collins Rector, along with others, are said to have molested teenage boys. Oh yeah, that's because they were throwing pedophile parties there. These weren't just normal parties. These were parties where they would invite some of the child actors that they were using for their productions over. They would ply them with alcohol, they would molest them, and sometimes they would film those molestations. So in August of 2000, Mark Collins Rector, this guy right here, was actually indicted for crimes against children. And afterwards, Mark Collins Rector, Brock Pierce, and the other investor in that company, Chad Shackley, they all fled America and headed to Spain. And Interpol eventually arrested all three of the men in 2002 in a small town known as Marbella. Interestingly though, Brock Pierce and Chad Shackley were released without any charges. They were never charged with a crime in connection with any of this, but guns, machetes, and child pornography were found in the home in Spain that Brock Pierce and these others had been living in. So eventually Mark Collins Rector was brought back to the US, and he admitted to luring 5 minors across state lines to have sex with them. and he was eventually given a very light sentence. However, in 2006, Mark Collins Rector was given permission to head to the UK for a brain operation, and as soon as he got to London, he renounced his US citizenship and has never returned. He's a free man now instead of serving his sentence. As of 2014, he lives in Antwerp and uses the name Mark Collins and Morgan von Phoenix. This was all talked about in a documentary called An Open Secret. It's a powerful film. But I always found it interesting that Brock Pierce went on the run with this guy. He operated this company with this guy. He was allegedly at the parties with this guy when these children were molested and filmed. And there was child pornography found in that house in Spain, and he's never been charged. So then when I see a picture like this of him in the Epstein files, pretty weird, no? This Russian billionaire and friend of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell's recently self-deleted in Russia in the midst of the Epstein files scandal. So this is Umar Zabrailov. I hope I said his name correctly, but Umar was a Russian billionaire. He was also in Russian politics, but I don't understand the nuances of Russian politics, so I'm not really going to comment on that. What I do know, though, is that Umar was somewhat of a party boy, and somewhere along the way, he crossed paths with Ghislaine Maxwell and, yes, Jeffrey Epstein. So this is actually a photo of Umar from the Epstein files. I remember finding this file months ago and asking my audience, who is this guy? Because he kind of looked familiar. I guess he wasn't familiar to me, but he's mentioned and seen multiple times throughout the files. And there are direct communications revealed between Umar and Ghislaine and Epstein in May through June 2001, where they talk about a trip to Moscow, including Epstein. And in this email exchange, Umar states he really wants to see Epstein and Ghislaine. And yeah, there's a lot tying these people together. Obviously, there is a lot of discourse online alleging that Epstein was some sort of a Russian asset as well, but we can talk about that in a different video. So Umar, being a billionaire who is closely tied into Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, I'm sure that he saw something, and in my opinion, he seems like the perfect candidate for someone who may have participated in Epstein's illicit trafficking ring. And with his name being in the Epstein files and his photo in the Epstein files, he was all over the news in Russia in the last few months. However, just about a week ago, on March 2nd of this year, at age 67, Umar was found dead, and he had died after being shot with a pistol in a Moscow hotel. Now, obviously, they are calling this a self-deletion, but with all the individuals involved in this case, I always question that ruling. Not only did Jeffrey Epstein have the most suspicious death literally of all time, but Jeffrey Epstein's partner, Jean-Luc Brunel, also self-unalived in the exact same way in a French prison after Epstein. I mean, I've done multiple videos about the dozens of bizarre and strange deaths surrounding Jeffrey Epstein and his ring, but for this guy to suddenly die in the midst of all of this and he's being mentioned and brought up, I don't know, it's just strange timing to me. Now, it did state that he had tried to do the same thing years prior, back in 2020, and obviously, with your name being in the press as being linked to a notorious pedophile and trafficker and your photo actually being in the file, that would be a lot of stress. So, I mean, I can see the angle where he could have potentially self-deleted himself. However, in the Epstein case, I really don't think there are coincidences. And I think timing is everything. I think extraneous circumstances are everything. And this deserves to be investigated as more than someone who decided to check out early. These photographs found in the Epstein files reference a very famous book written about a pedophilic relationship. As you can see on this, I'm assuming this is a victim's chest, it looks like, is written at the very top, Lolita. Taking a trip of 3 steps down the palate, I think that says, to tap at 3 on the teeth. And actually, there are a number of photos from the Epstein files showing quotes from this work, Lolita, literally written on the bodies of what I believe are victims. This one is extremely telling. I mean, you can literally see Lolita in the background behind this, what I'm assuming is victim's foot. The quote says she was low, plain low in the morning, standing 4 feet 10 in one sock. And then there you go. She was, I think this says Dolly at school, but these are all, according to my research, pictures of a victim or victims who wrote these quotes on their bodies. So Lolita, like I said, is a very infamous book which depicts a relationship, which I don't really think is ever really a relationship, but a relationship nonetheless between an adult, an older man, and a very young teenaged girl. And you may know, but this book was infamously adapted into Stanley Kubrick's film Lolita, which depicted that relationship. But it's known that Epstein had an absolute obsession with that book and movie. He nicknamed his plane, his private jet, the Lolita Express. There are a number of photos that have stemmed from the Epstein files, which clearly show copies of Lolita in and around Epstein's home and properties. He collected these works, so he had an obsession with the story and the movie and the book. So to see this sort of a thing written on the body or bodies of a victim or victims is incredibly disturbing. And I want to remind you again, as I do at the end of every one of these videos, this is probably my 150th video so far, the DOJ and the FBI believe that nobody should be held accountable for the rape of these young victims. They are trying to tell you that not one other person molested one of these victims. It was only Jeffrey Epstein. He never brought any of these victims to any other men. And this was all just totally normal, the totally normal workings of an elite pedophile. We know that that isn't true, but we need to get more angry. You need to make your voices heard. You need to tweet your representatives, call your representatives, make videos, make posts online. We need to protest, if we're being honest. I would love to start a protest or get a protest set up and lined up, because we're not doing enough. Bill Cosby is in the Epstein files and we need to talk about it. So about a week ago, I was making a video for my channel and I decided on camera to type Bill Cosby's name into the Epstein files database. And I was absolutely shocked by what I found. So as you can see right here, this is an email sent to Jeffrey Epstein on Wednesday, January 9th, 2013. We don't know who sent the email, but we can see that the subject states Bill Cosby. There's the EFTA number there. But if we dig into this a little bit further, we can see that there were a number of emails sent around that time dealing with Bill Cosby. For example, you can see here January 8th, 2013, the day before that last email was sent, Leslie Groff, Jeffrey Epstein's assistant, whose name was poorly redacted from this email, sends a message to an unknown person saying, "Alert, does JE want to follow up with Bill Cosby re-dinner on the 23rd?" It seems like Jeffrey Epstein invited Bill Cosby to dinner at his house. Now, we know that Cosby lived in the area. He lived in very close proximity to Jeffrey Epstein, but I had never seen an actual invitation to hang out before. As you can see right here, this is an email from Leslie Groff, Epstein's assistant, to a man named Larry Delson, sent Tuesday, January 8th, and she states, 7 o'clock dinner with Woody Allen, Bobby Slayton, and Louis Black. Invited Bill Cosby. Can he come? Awaiting reply. And I can't imagine going to a dinner like this. That must be a nightmare blunt rotation. You've got Woody Allen, the Predator film director, Bill Cosby, the super predator, and then Jeffrey Epstein as the cherry on top. Unfortunately for Epstein, though, it seems that Bill Cosby couldn't make it to dinner. We can see this email sent 1/9/2013, which states, Rich Barnett ran into Mr. Cosby's houseman on 71st Street. The houseman said, unfortunately, Mr. Cosby will be out west somewhere in California when you are holding the dinner on the 23rd. Otherwise, he would have loved to come. We all know that Bill Cosby is one of the biggest predators, most infamous predators in American history, and he got away with it for so long, kind of like another person that I know. But it is an interesting concept, and it made me wonder, did Bill Cosby ever actually make it over to Jeffrey Epstein's house? I mean, if they lived in close proximity, Cosby could have been invited by word of mouth, a phone call. It didn't have to happen over email. So I think there's a very high possibility, or maybe I should say high chance, that Bill Cosby actually did attend some sort of event or dinner at Epstein's home, which to me is just a very frightening concept.